Trifa, Chief Product Officer, co-founder of a startup called EVRYTHNG. I'm going to talk to you more about the web of things, where not just the data, but also products themselves can connect, talk to each other. And the specific aspect is restifying the physical product. So who does not understand the term restifying? All right, just interpret it as putting a web API on a physical product. That's as simple as that. So page down, right? All right, so I'm going to start about the Internet of Things. Everybody talks about it, smart fridges, smart energy, smart whatsoever. But the reality is it's more a buzzword, it's more a funny thing rather than an actual reality where my toaster start hanging out with my fridge and stuff like that. Didn't really happen in reality. And the main reason for that, why, is magic. So the reason is that the Internet of Things today is mainly really specific application, which we call distributed sensing application, where you have really specific sensors, devices that talk to each other in really proprietary, obscure, dark protocols, ZigBee and ugly things like that. And they connect to a gateway, then this gateway translates the data, stores that in some other database. Then there's a third-party application that takes the data, analyzes it. There's another website which takes and displays that data and so on. And the problem is, for each new scenario, for each new application, you pretty much need to reinvent everything. So there's a lot of wheel reinvention going on, and it's really hard to take a standard storage analysis and use that no matter what your device is, because there are so many programming models, data formats, applications, and so on. And one of the things we try to tackle this problem simply to make it easier to build Lego building blocks that can easily connect to each other is what we call the Web of Things. And what the Web of Things means is, if you take those devices, they have very dark protocols that only hardcore Coke drinking engineers can understand. And we try to hide that behind HTTP, literally the web. And the idea for that is we want to leverage the web architecture, standards, techniques. The thing is, we've spent the last 25 years to build really scalable, really performant systems that allow to authenticate, that are secure, robust, and simply the web. And the idea is, why do we need to reinvent all of the things that work for building websites? Why do we need to reinvent that for each new device in there instead of literally reusing that? The other reason is exactly because TCP/IP, web, Wi-Fi routers are pretty much ubiquitous. You can take those for granted, and it's much simpler. So the actual reason, the advantages of using HTTP, so the same standards as the web, are simply HTTP itself is more flexible. It's a really flexible, lightweight, easy-to-use protocol, and it's loosely coupled, which means every time you go to a website, you only need a browser. You don't need to install a driver for each new website you're watching, because that would be horror. And because it was so simple, that was one of the factors that made the web work in the last 25 years. And it's really scalable, and 2 billion people over are using the web every single day. And it's also very lightweight, so you can put the web on very small devices. For example, when you have your Wi-Fi router at home, you can just type its IP address in your browser and you can start configuring it via the web. You don't need to install special programs which are made by really weird companies and so on. And finally, because it's a standard, really, so every programming language, so many libraries, so many software in the world speaks the same language, literally HTTP. So that was the reason. And first of all, the interesting aspect why it's related to products is, if you can imagine, you take the web as you know it today, where you can just type your favorite website in the browser. If you can extend that to the physical world and start controlling devices, start interacting, understanding where the products come from, how they are used by who, and all of that information, that would be really amazing, because you would push the boundary of the physical, of the digital web, literally in the physical world. And also the second reason is the development of web application is simply cheaper and faster, because there are thousands, if not millions, well, obviously millions, of people who can build websites. All you need is a front-end developer who can just do some basic HTML, maybe some JavaScript, and you can build a physical application where you can control physical products, devices. Before, you had to hire really expert, specialized programmers who knew how to do really technical, low-level things. And there aren't many people in the world who are really familiar with this technology. So that was the idea where we come from. Make it really easy for a majority of developers to start interacting with physical products. So now, let me give you an example. Imagine if every product you have in your house would have its own URL. You can just see what's in your fridge, pop up your phone, and type the URL of your fridge. You can see the content, you can see the status of the fridge. That's just fun. Then imagine you can also switch your TV channels by using the same web browser. And more interestingly, you can imagine the cops or fire service that subscribe to the RSS feed of your fire alarm. I mean, I'm a little bit caricaturating, but the idea is that all of these products would have the same interface, the same protocol, which has been used for 25 years by every website. Instead of, oh, the fridge requires this particular protocol made by this company, and it's very different from the one used by your TV. And that's really what we try to emphasize is interoperability. Now, representations, you would have just a website, nice looking website to interact with your TV, but you can also imagine more machine-readable data that is used by your TV to talk to your fridge. Now, let me give you an example, a more concrete example. How many of you have ever been to Japan? And I assume you most stayed in a hotel, right? So the reality of staying in a hotel in Japan is really painful. You have a remote control like this, which is obviously the translation is not included. So you just can't do that. You just can't figure out. I mean, you end up cold, sick the next day because there are so many buttons, starts raining, you just can't control this thing. And I always wondered, but I am in a hotel, there is Wi-Fi, I'm connected to the hotel Wi-Fi network, and because printers and Wi-Fi routers have tiny web servers, why can't the same appliances, and especially one important such as air conditioning or heating, can have its own tiny web server because it's technically very doable. And more interestingly, why can I just pop up my phone, browse to the website offered by my air conditioning device and start interacting with it? Because that would be super cool, super fast, and that would be in my own language because websites are more or less adapting to your language. And just for the record, this image was not photoshopped. It took me less time to actually build the interface with HTML and CSS than making it with Photoshop. So that's my point is any web designer, any web developer, person who can do websites could start controlling the physical world. All right, so that's the Web of Things, more about electronic devices and physical sensors. But what about dumb products? So that's exactly what we try to do with our company is bridge that gap, is everyday objects. How could those become part of the web? Something like a shoe. You don't need to search for your shoe, but you could Google them. There was a sentence by a quote from Bruce Sterling, and the idea is pretty interesting. What if everyday object would be connected to the web? That doesn't mean Nike Plus, where you actually have a sensor in your shoe, but a lot of the data, such as where it comes from, doesn't need to be physically stored on your shoe. It can just be stored on a database somewhere and look like it's stored on your shoe. So to extend this metaphor, what it means is imagine if every product you own would have its tiny API, and from the web you could interact, you can start building application for your product. So for your shoes, you can use an application which retrieves maintenance information, how do you clean them, how do you repair them, or technical support for a watch, but also more social dimension. For example, you have this jewel and you can attach pictures of your grandparents who owned this jewel before you, and attach history, attach information, attach media content to physical products, and you can pass that over across generation. And the last example, Harley Davidson, if you own one, you could very easily build a website to which you can authenticate and log in only if this API proves that you actually own a Harley Davidson. So you can imagine applying this metaphor to so many examples. And that's exactly what we try to do, is simply put a web API to any single unique product in the world. And if you and I have the same model of Harley Davidson, because you and I are different persons, so will be the URL, the API of our product, because they are simply different. So just an example, the smart product stack, that's what we call, is how do we actually connect the products to the engine to build applications. So you have obviously the products down, and you can connect those to our engine literally using sensors, so physically present on the devices, or just an NFC tag, or simply the QR code. And what this QR code contains is simply the identifier, the unique international, the global unique serial number and API of that product. If it's stored on a product or not, it's irrelevant. Just like in the web, you don't really care where the data is stored. All you need is an API to access that data. So now, what it means in practice for products to be part of the web, every physical product, every unique instance of a product, every stake, if you want, needs its own unique permanent URL on the web, with obviously a secure API for application to read and write data. And at this API, what you want to have is a container, a digital data storage where you can store historical multimedia data about your product. When it was made, by who checked it, who it was sold to, and so on, all of the data we discussed before. And also what would be interesting on top of that is if at the URL, the API of your product, you would have a semantic format, so that means any application could go to the URL of your product and start to understand, what is it? It's a shoe. What is the brand? What is the manufacturer? So that application, not just people, can understand and leverage that information. And finally, what you want around that is services, tools to manage millions of objects and their real-time data. First, for you as a user, you might want to manage all the products you own, but if you're a company and you create millions of products a day, like PNG and so on, you need really efficient tools to be able to process, understand where each one of those products are, how they are being used, and what each one of the customer needs, how they use your product to get feedback, for example. And finally, you want to have also connectors to third-party applications, your CRM system, your ERP, your SAP, and so on. And the combination of all those things turn into a digital doppelganger, if you want, a Facebook profile for your unique product, and that is yours. And that's what we call an active digital identity. And every object needs an ADI in order to be able to talk web and integrate with other websites. So we have a technical white paper if you're interested in how this is done more technically. And we also recently released a higher level, more so what white paper, which we call the product relationship management. And that's an area we've been exploring a lot, is how to enable big companies, brands, to turn each one of their product into a unique conversation channel with the person who owns it, to ultimately be able to provide much more personalized, meaningful, useful products and services to each one of the customers. So just to summarize, an ADI is really a piece of data that lives in the cloud, that contains all the information you need about your product, your physical object, and that can connect to social networks, to physical devices, to sensors, to existing software online. So thank you. We invite you to give it a try. There's an API. It's free. It's open. And we have just released a brand new version where you can create new applications, custom projects. You can check into products, physical products, using social network identities, and it's fresh out of the oven. So I'm happy to help, and thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Vlad.
Thank you.
It certainly sounds like products have got a very exciting future that's going to be a lot more digital, which will hopefully the kind of, I think everyone here is probably thinking a similar thing, that if these products are more connected, it can become easier to track them than when something was being made in an unknown factory in Bangladesh, taken by a different trucking company to somewhere else, to a holding area that was owned by a different company, and continuously transported between these kind of anonymous entities. And this kind of technology can start to make products actually trackable, making the availability of open product data much easier. And much better to play with, hopefully.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions for Vlad? Tav?
First of all, I'd like to say brilliant talk. My question is basically, so I completely understand what you're saying about having a global things and from a URI to connectivity to existing
Can you talk up a little bit?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hello.
That's
Yeah.
better.
So totally see the perspective of the value of the web in that context. However, the reality that, at least for myself, is that in my home, most of the products are, some of them are a decade old, other things are 20, 30, much, much older than the life cycle that I'm used to on seeing on the web. On the web services exist for a tiny bit of time and then they disappear just as quickly. So if my washing machine is talking to an API provider, what guarantees are there that the products will keep on being there 10 years later? What's the, even in terms of having a permanent, you mentioned the word permanent system.
Yeah.
I can see how you can have a system identified, but even in terms of a domain that a service is talking to, those are not the systems. So how do we deal with that?
That's a very good question. So I think one of the major issues so far was that each one of those protocols, every company would create their own system from scratch, which is closed and internal. And as long as you trust the company, that's fine. And that's why, in a way, we play the role of a third-party company, which doesn't necessarily. I would say we obviously work with customers and the company to store the data, so that's obviously our business model. But what is more interesting to us, and that's also where the Web of Things background comes from and is interesting, is that we try to leverage something that is standard and already used. So at least at a protocol level, at least at the API level, that is a standard. And that's why we've tried really hard not to reinvent, not to say, oh, we have this new protocol, which is what continuously every company has done systematically. Hey, we have this new protocol, it's amazing. Nobody uses that. It's 1,000 people and 1,000 devices, and it's used for 2 weeks because it's fun, and that's it. And that's really what we try to avoid, because obviously every company will have its own, and it's either you buy everything from my company or the highway. You see what I mean? And that's what we try to avoid, is just get everyone on the same page. And the validity, if your data will stay, if the storage, if you want, the hosting, that's a whole different issue. Hopefully we'll be in business for a while, but even if we aren't, the important thing is that the APIs and the structure itself is open, and that will remain. And that is also the aspect we really care about, is the API itself. They're entirely transparent and RESTful, so that in theory you can take and build the same thing. Well, obviously as a company, what we try to add is value on top of that is meaningful for customers and companies. But the data storage and the API is just the lower level, the building blocks, really. Does that answer your?
It doesn't answer the question, but I can see the reasoning why what you're doing is better than Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? In the front row?
Do you think we'll ever see the day when everything in the supermarket has a chip, or do you think there will ever be a day when everything in the supermarket has a chip or a QR code, and we just load up our shopping, walk out the shop, and it just builds us automatically?
I think the day where every product will have some sort of identifier that identifies the product class and not the individual, I think that's there to a large extent. Every product has 1D barcodes already. But I think what is really missing to bridge the gap, and why big companies will need to put unique QR codes on each one of their product, I think that's the biggest challenge we had also as a company, is why do you need every one of your product to be unique? And that's the only way you get to do that is by having companies understand what is the benefit for each one of their product to be different. And that's something very new in a way, because few use cases, few large use cases have existed. And the challenge is when you're a massive company that builds millions of products every single day, then you need to have really good reasons why you need to recreate, change your printing infrastructure, because that's what it comes down to. If you have to process 500 packages a minute, you cannot print a unique QR code on each product. You could do it, but that would be significantly slower, significantly more expensive. So you need to have really good reasons why this happens. So I think when both the production and marketing sides of companies would understand the benefits of that, one example is simply product data tracking or personalized experiences around your product, then that might very well happen. So I don't think we're far, but I just think there's a notch needed for this to happen.
Can I jump the queue quickly? Sorry, I realise there's 2 more questions. In that, it's something that I'm very interested in, products having their unique code. But do you think that's going to come from the bottom up, from consumers demanding it? Or do you think, there's a whole new industry of supply chain managers that's coming up? Are they going to be the ones that demand it? Or is it going to come from a governmental level of demanding the tracking? Where do you think that pressure is going to come from?
I would say third position would be a consumer, because it's really hard for consumers to say, we want this, and companies say, of course, we entirely listen to you, we'll make it happen. So that's, otherwise product data would have been around, tracking data would have been around. Second position would have been I think the maybe first and second position would be government and supply chain. So government might have a strong impact, for example, for highly regulated products. For example, pharma, there are new regulations in the EU popping up which say, well, from I think 2015 or something, every unique box of periods need to have its digital pedigree and all that information. So in those products, there might be a very, very strong push for this to happen. I would hope, sincerely, for every food-related stuff we stuff ourselves with daily, that there will be the governments who, hey, we need to track that data. I think it's more like a civil right than anything else to know what you're eating and what it has been eaten before you. You know the idea. And the supply chain, I think the big challenge in the supply chain is when you want to have unique identity on products, that increases the cost of making the product. So I would say the benefits you make out of each product is reduced. And when you think as a supply chain manager, your bonus at the end of the year means, well, the cheaper you can make it, the more you earn, technically speaking. So you need to have a very good reason why you need to say, you know what, I'm going to make it, I'm okay, I'm willing to take the extra cost because there are other benefits. But purely just from the supply chain management perspective, I think there's more from the company, more push from the company that needs to happen. Because tracking RFID has been around for 10, 20 years. It's used more or less successfully in many use cases, but it's not something that is super universal, super open, and anyone can access. So I think that is the important thing. Obviously, technology and supply chain and all of this software is not very Web 2.0, if you see what I mean, but I think there's a lot of progress that can be done. And what we do is try to show that there are much better ways to track and manage product data and supply chain information.
Fantastic. Just next door, shall we move along the line in a suitably English fashion? Yes, do you want to go first and then we'll move on to you?
Vlad, all of the infrastructure you described you're developing in the context of everything, in terms of business proposition, will it be based on open standards? Are you doing this to become, let's say, the next PayPal, having some degree of monopoly of this kind of infrastructure? I'm sorry, I'm being cheeky here on purpose and want to be that hard on you. Or you're actually doing this for the benefits of everything that is impacted by this technology? Perhaps it's a bit of a close question, but I leave this to you.
To be honest, I sincerely believe that the best way to do business is in a win-win scenario where you as a company win by having everyone win in supply chain. I think that's really what we try to do, because many companies do it solely for the purpose of the consumer, and the companies are not willing to pay the price, or the other way around, where you have all of this really obscure marketing tracking where you have no idea what data is being collected about you, and company using that for really obscure purpose. And what we try to do is, first of all, have more transparency and be able to establish bidirectional communication between you as a consumer. If every one of your product had a unique barcode, and if that meant, well, I scan this product and boom, metaphorically speaking, I have a chat room with a tech support and I can send them a message on WhatsApp, hey dude, this isn't working, what can I do? That's a benefit for me as a consumer, because when I buy a product, I buy it because I care. I buy about for the whole ecosystem that comes with the product, not just for the product. Say you buy a guitar because you like music, you want more than just the guitar, you want to see what are the concerts in your style, you want to find the equipment that is exactly for the style of music you like to play, and all of those services, you have to do the hard work as a consumer. So if the product could be the hub for what I want in the ecosystem of services on the product, I'll be happier. And likewise, if I'm happier, the company would understand better who each one of the customer is and how to deliver exactly what each customer needs. So for coming back to the standards, we try to use only open standards. So everything is documented, everything is RESTful. The implementation of the engine, our technology isn't, but the standards are simply web. And that was something very important for us to not come up with yet another one closed, weird protocol in the sense that many companies have doing. So.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. 1, 2, 1, 2. Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. How does this work? First of all, really enjoyed your talk. How does this work when you're making things somewhere where you cannot assume you've got a really, really strong connection to the internet and everything like that, and you can't register with a centralized service? We had an earlier speaker talk about having a decentralized approach. It'd be really nice to have you just talk a bit about a decentralized approach and see how that relates to this current vision, because I feel a centralized approach is going to be very, very difficult to implement outside of very, very fast, well-connected environments.
That's a very valid point. I think when it comes to product data, obviously there are, if you look, for example, at Bitcoin, it works because it's really decentralized and you have many eyes looking at each other. And that's something that is a very interesting approach if we can build the equivalent of that distributed. But that's, for me, something further down the road, because first of all, the use case, the way you can actually provide value to customers and companies with this system needs to be addressed first. So I think the use case you mentioned for decentralized, that's really the background. That's where we came from. So before working at everything, I was doing my PhD in the web of things, and the approach was really academic, where you can play around without any specific interest, really, which is a great place to be. And for physical products where you can interact, say, smart home, all of this application, entirely makes sense for them to be distributed. I don't want, when I turn on my light, that I have to send a command on a server somewhere in Uruguay for it to come back 5 seconds later. Oh, there is light. So obviously for use cases like this, which are hyper-local, hyper-physical, interaction-centric, then you can decentralize this command. But when it comes to product data, the authority aspect is very important first. You need to trust that that is genuine data, that is endorsed in some way by the companies, and that is trusted. So that's the position we're interested to get in first, and then you can think of how you decentralize, how you literally decentralize that and can open that up.
Fantastic. We'll take one more question. Here you go.
I was just wondering, all the social networking and internet things have basically started out as like a service and then have been hijacked by advertising companies to then throw a load of stuff down your throat that you don't really need, that is actually customized to you because they've got all your data on Facebook. Do you see this as a way of like developing like a profile of the products that people have and then generating revenue from advertising? Is that the goal?
That's a very valid question. I think I would say the problem is we are used from we're used to advertising from a historical spam perspective. We're like, I don't want 10% on a jacket because I bought something totally unrelated 5 years ago. So that's not what smart, modern, efficient marketing means. And I see the future as a place where there's no more such thing as marketing where people, hey, you need to buy this, you really need to buy. I don't care. Towards something where, because you really care about something, when you receive offers or information or content, actually you're happy because you're, dude, that's amazing. I didn't know this was available for the product. So I think that's really the way we see the future and where we want to get into a place where you don't receive spam and marketing, but you receive content that you care about and you don't receive stuff and larger stuff that you don't care about.
And can I respond to that as well? I think it's actually something really interesting that only a couple of years ago, I was absolutely horrified by, so they call it narrowcasting, I believe, you know, where they target you for certain things, and some of the things that came up. The funniest one was I sent my girlfriend a picture of a ring, which had nothing to do with anything. Suddenly, the whole side of my Facebook became wedding gowns, you know, all of this. They start going down the side.
No,
it's
guys,
incredible, isn't it? It's like,
stop
you
what
know,
I meant.
stop that. And I wondered whether it was doing it to hers, and she thought I was very weird when I asked. But the point is, and I think one of the things when I gave a talk a while ago at the Open Institute about this idea of open product data, my kind of dream for it was that I could choose what was narrowcasted towards me, so that I could say, these are my ethics. Yes, I do want to eat meat, but I don't want to eat meat that I feel has been tortured or persecuted or has been travelled, you know, live for thousands of miles across Europe. I don't want to eat that, and I don't want to support that industry. You know, I do want to wear leather shoes, but I want the cows to come from England so they don't have loads of miles on them and various other things, you know. Also, I want to support some companies and not support other companies, because I like what those companies are doing. They might be social enterprises or have charitable sectors or CSR departments that I believe in. And if I can choose those settings myself, and maybe there are some predictive algorithms that suggest things to change your preferences, I think that's a good thing and will actually be a great way of taking consumers from making you know, decisions on impulse to making more decisions that fit with their own personal values. And hopefully that will have a feedback loop to the companies to say, actually, this is the way that it goes. So I don't fundamentally have a problem with that.
Yeah, no, I was just coming at it from the point of view, like, you know, like the NSA in America have now got 100% access to everyone's iPhones, and I was just wondering where, if there is at the moment, a safeguard towards that. So say if I have like a certain amount of products and everybody knows that I have these products, so therefore everyone thinks about me in a certain way and advertises to me in a certain way, or vice versa, if you had products that maybe everyone wasn't so keen on having, not really sure what they were.
Just a very small thing to that is, for us, our main customers are brands. So basically, we are hosting data on brands' behalf, and obviously, if we host it for one brand, they might not be happy if we share their customer data with another brand which is in the same server. So for us, it's really important that the brand knows and decides, okay, you know what, it's my right because I'm paying to host that data. I want to share this, but not that. And I think we are very early. We are 2 years old company, really. But for us, it's really important that both sides have more control, ownership, and decide, you know what, I think as a brand has only to win if they share data about their products. I mean, why don't brands do that? Hey, we have this data, like, here, take it, it's an Excel file, CLS, CSV, whatever, do stuff with it. Why is that closed? Because it's just in their own benefits, and you have to scrape it and take it from websites to access that data. So I think you need to empower companies to make that literally very easily, like, okay, my data is shared now with the public, that's the license, and so on. I mean, there are no tools for a company to do that very easily. They have to hack it, they need to create APIs from scratch every single time, and those API won't be exactly the same for each company. And that's why for us it was interesting to try to centralize that more from an API point of view than data storage and ownership, really. So
fantastic. Thanks very much, Vlad. That was incredibly
Thank you.
interesting.